Cool.
People should do, and you can also try sharing your, yeah, plug the TV in.
Okay, let me just first make sure I'm up and running on this as I want to. Slideshow. Cool, and then I can close this. Awesome. Hey everyone, we're gonna I join now. We have some people online.
Oh wow! Okay, we have the infinite tunnel. Perfect.
Super.
And can you try now sharing? I hope it's allowed.
Yeah, I need to quickly see. So I am mirroring at the moment, then I'll do this. I'll do slideshow. And then I shall close my calendar. And then I shall go here. And now I shall share my screen.
Oh, great. I'll have to come up here.
Screen share.
It's not working.
1 second, share. Presenter mode, share content, window. We need permission to share your screen. Wonderful. Screen private settings.
I think through the camera we can actually see the entire screen. So
I think that's fine, right? If we go here.
Yeah.
See what it looks like. I think this is fine.
Yeah. Can people over the chat respond if they can see everything on the screen? If not, then we can sort out the screen sharing.
I can literally send you the link.
Oh yeah, that's also.
Should we do that?
An option.
We can also get started and then just improvise heavily as we go.
Yeah, I think this should be fine. This should be
Yeah?
fine. Screen is okay because the entire screen is in the camera. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay, and it's going to be very improvised in that case.
Okay. Okay, so it's I think okay, we can go with how many pizzas should we go with?
Sorry?
Three pizza? For this one, because he is just putting down the order now. So.
I don't mind. I'm probably not going to stay super long after the talk.
I think we can have 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So we can do a quick round of intro. Maybe starting with you, if that works.
I actually don't do machine learning. I'm a health economist, and I come here because I'm East friend. And I'm also, of course, very interested in machine learning being applied in healthcare because we do economic evaluation sometimes for AI-supported technologies. So for me, it's just to get a general idea to see how AI machine learning can be used in healthcare. Yeah.
Awesome.
Amazing. You?
Yes, I'm Dr. Kelly McClinton. I'm here because I'm now Ying's friend. So we have a chain of friends.
Okay.
But I do have a background in complex systems, so I'm intrigued.
Cool. Yeah. Perfect.
I'm Alex. I'm studying robotics. I do a bit of work with multi-agent reinforcement learning.
Cool. And I'm Chubby, and we are hosting the Oxford XML Talks. And today we have the honor to have a top-notch machine learning researcher, Jakob Foerster, associate professor and PI of the FLAG group, short for Foerster Lab for AI Research. Jakob has first-hand experience from working at the most prestigious places in both industry and academia. During his PhD, he interned at Google Brain, DeepMind, and OpenAI, which is extremely cool. And after his PhD, he joined Facebook as a senior research scientist. And in 2022, he returned to our department, engineering science in Oxford, to work on safe and scalable machine learning methods. And yeah, floor is yours, Jakob.
Wonderful, thank you for having me. I like to keep this as interactive as possible because this is a topic that if you want to see polished talks, you could just look up. I've given a lot of talks, they're online. I can be a good speaker, but that defeats the point. So let's make this a dialogue. I have been very interested in a long time in the question of how we actually make multi-agent learning work. And let's think about what that actually means. Here is self-driving cars. And as you can imagine, this is not what the world looks like, right? Because we don't have one company controlling all the cars, perhaps luckily. Instead, the world looks a lot more like this, right? Where we have many different agents, actors that pursue their own interests and incentives. And what I'm caring about is, what do we want AI systems to do when acting in the presence of other self-interested agents? And something that will come up a lot is the distinction between an agent and a principal. What I mean by that is the principal is the person, human, deploying an AI agent. So let's get that straight. I could be a principal, and for example, the autonomous vehicle acting on my behalf could be an agent. Does that make sense? So I'm going to keep that distinction hopefully quite clear throughout my talk. And this is the framework I'm trying to address: decision-making in the presence of other intelligent agents. And this is obvious in the multi-self-driving car case. There are other cases where this is less obvious. So for example, when we think about machine translation, we think of it as a supervised learning problem where I have inputs on the left-hand side and have desired outputs on the right-hand side. And the trouble obviously is that supervised learning is never that easy, because what you might have is you might have users, and the users might want to actually use the system. And that means they might want to go in and translate their websites. But then this goes back into your trained data. Right? So quite commonly, once we deploy systems, they're interacting with other agents and other principals. And then suddenly we get these hidden multi-agent systems. We won't talk about those. Instead, we'll try and understand, get an intuition for the challenges of learning in these systems by looking at the prisoner's dilemma. Can I have a show of hands, please, both in the room and online, for who knows what the prisoner's dilemma is? Wonderful. Online, how are we doing? I can't see online interactions. Show of hands if you know what the prisoner's dilemma is, please. Cool. Nobody knows. Show of hands if you are alive.
Okay, that's a good start.
We should be heavily concerned.
Somebody put up their hands twice. Okay,
Cool. People are really alive.
Really alive.
Good.
That's a good sign.
So, cool. So let's this is. I've explained this many a times, and I've always gotten the explanation of this problem slightly wrong and confused. I think it's my slides, but maybe it's just me. But I'll try it again. So Alice and Bob, two principals, went to rob a bank, and they got caught by the police, and they're being interviewed independently. And they can either cooperate with each other, which is to remain silent, in which case they get 1 year in prison each for lack of evidence. However, if Xavi is kind enough to say, oh, we didn't do it, and I instead defect against him by collaborating with the police, that means I defect and he cooperates, which means I get 0 years in prison and he gets 3 years in prison. Okay. This seems really simple. And by the way, if we both say the other side did it, they have evidence against both of us and we get 2 years in prison each. So the first question I want to pose to the room is, what would you do if you were in a prisoner's dilemma? So why don't we just play the game? Alex, if you don't mind, let's just play the game. So what's going to happen here is Xavi's going to count down from 3 to 0. We'll close our eyes and we'll both cooperate and defect. Cooperation means thumbs up. Defection means thumbs down. Okay? Without further ado, Xavi, I'm waiting on your count.
3, 2, 1, now. Okay.
Okay.
That's pretty distrustful.
So what just happened? We both defected, and that means we ended up in this cell. -2, -2. And this seems really, really stupid a priori, right? Because suddenly we're both spending a year longer in prison than we should in the best case. And that is, even though I assume, sorry for speaking for you on your behalf, Alex, we're both trying to do the best for our own intentions. Would anyone act differently in this setting? Would you not have defected, and if so, why? So you also defected in this setting. Thank you for participating. How about you? Would you have defected? Or are you confused about the rules of the game, which is also totally fine. I've explained this many times. It's always equally confusing, so I'm with you on this one.
Confused.
Still too confused. Wonderful. So what just happened is we had a choice between I'm the row player and Alex was the column player. Based on the indices 0, 1, 0, 1, we get the entry in that row in that column. I'm the first player, they're the second player. Okay? Copy? So I played defection, Alex played defection. I got 2 years in prison, Alex got 2 years in prison. Had we played cooperation and cooperation, we would have both gotten 1 year in prison. Yes? No, maybe? So this seems fine. I'm actually quite happy with the fact that we both ended up 2 years in prison, because it is, given the constraints, the best thing we could do. Because doing anything else would be irrational. And that is because if you look at the structure of this game, no matter what Alex is doing, I could get a year less in prison by defecting rather than cooperating. So let's play this through. If Alex is defecting and I cooperate, I get 3 years in prison. If I instead also defect, I get 2 years in prison. So I'm 1 year in prison less, better off. On the other hand, if Alex was nice enough to cooperate with me and I cooperate, I get 1 year in prison. If I defect instead, I get 0 years in prison. In other words, cooperation is dominated by defection. There's literally nothing else that as rational agent, as rational principle, if I'm acting, I could ever want in the situation. And this is partially why, as humans, we've gone a long way to avoid these types of single-shot prisoner's dilemma. What we've done is we've come up with social structures, legal frameworks, and frankly, temporal extended versions of the game to avoid what is called the social catastrophe, whereby individually rational behavior leads to jointly worst case outcomes. Because if you're careful, you can see that this is actually the collectively worst case outcome, 4 years in prison in total, rather than 2, 3 on the after. So let's instead assume that we're playing this game in an iterated version, whereby, I don't know your name, sorry. Meow. Whereby Meow and I will play this game until Xabi drops a random coin which says the game is terminated, which might be taken forever, in which case it's going to be a very boring talk. And we can both see the outcomes of the previous round.
Okay, so like at each round, you see the results of the previous turn.
We're going to have our eyes closed when we act, and we will open the eyes like before, and then we'll take another turn.
Okay.
With eyes closed.
Interesting.
How many cards do you hold?
It's going to be a probability of terminating of 1% per round, and Xabi is going to be the random number generator for us. Okay, Xabi, on your count.
All right.
Eyes closed.
3, 2, 1. Okay.
Okay, so what just happened? Meow was kind enough to cooperate with me, and I was smart enough, perhaps, to defect. So Meow, I hate to bring it to you, someone who spent 3 years in prison. I got out immediately, so I'm laughing my way to the bank. The good news is that we're going to play this game again. 3, 2, 1. Ouch! So this hurt. We both defected. We spent 2 years in prison.
Yeah. Okay.
Please.
Another round. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay. And the game has terminated.
And the game has terminated. So what just happened is we both ended up getting 5 years total in prison across the terms. What would you have played next?
If it had existed last round, then I'm going to keep playing.
But you don't know this is the last round, right? So if we had continued, again, the probability of termination is 1%. What would you have done?
So if it's infinite, I will cooperate. I think so. I play the fact just to punish you first round.
So a lot of things happened. We didn't coordinate on this, right? But what would have happened actually? I would have now played cooperation on the next move. And had Meow play cooperation on the next move, I would have kept playing cooperation forever. And we would have converged on -1, -1. Okay. So just take some time to let this sink in, right? Simply by playing the iterated game, suddenly humans, without any prior arrangements, will get to these mutually reciprocating answers, rather than playing the only rational option, which is defection. Questions? Everyone d'accord? Cool. And now the question is, you have no idea what the question is now, because I don't see the slides. Yeah, you should ask all sorts of things. You should all be up in arms. Yeah. Nobody complains, but this is fine. Usually people say, oh, it's but like altruism. What about being nice? Well, like, who says I want to maximize rewards? Well, what is a reward if you don't maximize it, right? So there's caveats here to sort of fend off the philosophers in the room, which sometimes happens. I'm saying all rewards are final. So they're the two objectives. There might be the years in prison plus my like general niceness. I'm a super nice person, right? So actually, I would never want to send anyone else to prison, but that's already baked into my numbers. Right? In reality, it's much more radical, it's much more punishing, but already I'm accounting for my selflessness because I'm a super nice guy, right? And they include empathy and so on. And the other assumption here is that these rewards are part of the problem setting. So as a machine learning engineer, the world exists and I cannot mess with the rewards. Because you could say, well, you know, single shot presence dilemma, I don't agree on the rewards. The rewards should be something different, should be something else. They should be the sum of rewards in the entire team. There should be something else. I'm like, well, tough luck. Principles exist and they want to do things and there's nothing you can do about that, right? All you can do is design machine learning algorithms that these principles may or may not want to deploy. Okay. And the question now is, what do you want? What do you want your algorithms to do, right? Because we know what the agents want. These are the rewards of the agents. But we have to ask ourselves, what do you actually want as a machine learning scientist? What do you want your algorithms to do? And how do you convince principals that they should deploy these algorithms? Does that make sense? That's the dilemma we're in. Right? And I think it is fair to say that at a minimum, if I'm a principal and I'm deploying these algorithms, the agent acting on my behalf should be doing as well as I would in that same situation, acting on my own behalf, right? So if I have an AI agent who's representing me in court, play through the example where I'm like, well, I don't really want to go to court. It's really annoying. So I'm going to send this bot that is going to go to court and answer questions on my behalf. Yeah, it's fair enough. That bot should be doing as well as if I was there in the bot's position. Okay, I think that's non-controversial, otherwise I wouldn't be using the bot. But bear in mind, the bot doesn't go to prison. I'm the principal. These are my rewards, not the bot's rewards. Bot's the agent, I'm the principal. Okay, yeah.
One question, like, is the bot designed for you specifically, or is it for like a grand population of people?
It's a good question. Is the bot designed for me specifically, or is it designed for the population? What does that mean if it's designed for the population?
Like to design, to represent as many people as possible in the courtroom. So for me specifically, it wouldn't get actually as a good result out as I could.
Then why would I ever send a bot in on my behalf? I'm the principal. If you come to me with a bot that like maximizes global welfare but sends me to prison for 10 years, I would never deploy that bot. Again, I'm a principal. I have a choice. Principal means I have agency over whether or not I want to deploy these algorithms. That's crucial. I have rewards, I have objectives, and I can decide whether or not to deploy technology on my behalf. I'm a principal. So that idea, I can mess with it. What you just did is we defined the reward function, which is like maximize something else, out. Can't do it because principals will not deploy it. Otherwise, they weren't principals because you're neglecting agency to principals, which goes against the entire definition of being a principal in the first place. Good question, crucial point, out. Any more questions like this? Then the rewards are meaningless. Then we can't even meaningfully talk about rewards. As it goes back to the question, would you play anything but defection in the single shot business dilemma? If you're someone who plays something else than defection, the rewards have lost all of their meaning, and we can not do meaningful work on that type of behavior. There are people who are irrational, but there's good theories that says they will have zero agency because they will lose all their resources. There's good economic models which basically say if you are an irrational agent, likely you don't matter in the grand scheme of things because you're just going to lose all your resources. You just squander everything because you're doing something crazy. Okay, so we can focus on principles that are not irrational, fully irrational. And remember, this is assuming like
You know, you could have also irrational preferences, but we'll bake them into here, right? If somehow I'm like more likely to cooperate because I think it's good to cooperate on a Sunday, that's baked into the reward function. Everything that is there is baked into the reward function. Yeah?
Just the main assumption here is that you can definitely bake everything in the reward function, and there's like never like some extra assumptions outside of the box that you are thinking. Like, for example, people who would cooperate instead of defecting, I think they might do it for their society, for their community.
We had to, sorry, yeah. Shabi, is there something that is unclear? Rewards are final. They include everything like empathy, altruism, and so on. Is this unclear? How is this unclear, please? It's all baked in. These are the final rewards after accounting for everything you just said.
Okay.
Is that still unclear?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, for offsetting you. Like,
no, this is fine. I'm just saying, like, you know, this is.
I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you. Are there any questions like this? It's good to have questions, because if it's unclear, we should talk about it.
So you try to quantify the empathy and treat them.
I don't need to. I'm saying they exist. There is a reward function which includes all of this. There is a reward function which accounts for all of this. Yeah.
I'm just curious. I mean, I don't know because I'm from a Western background culture. But are there any cultural assumptions in here about how people think and make decisions?
It's a good question. I think there is an assumption here that there is a branch of rational behavior, one under this very, very broad definition of rewards. And then, as I said, there are probably realms where this doesn't apply. I mean, I don't know where this doesn't apply because it's very, very broad. And if it, there will always be ranges in any culture where this kind of behavior applies. Because incentives, I think there's something common about humanity, which is incentives exist and humans respond to incentives. And that's all this says. There's like, people are able to do rational thinking anywhere on the planet, in any culture, is my claim.
But we're defining rationality.
No, because there's in the rewards. I'm saying they have objectives. Whatever the objectives might be, it might be to be sort of like minimize the amount of money they earn. It might be to like starve themselves to death. I can still describe that as being objective-driven behavior. And that's what I need. Does that make sense? The definition extraordinarily flexible, precise to keep all these questions out.
Is this the example we're going to when we get to the application, or is this just a conceptual exercise?
We will stay conceptual throughout this talk.
Okay.
Nothing will be applied.
Okay.
If you're looking for your like machine learning 101, you know, regression tree, go to YouTube. It's commoditized. Don't need me here. Okay. There's a lot of stuff that you don't need to go to a talk for. Big hint. Talk to GPT-4. It's going to explain to you just fine. Look it up on the internet. It's going to explain these things to you just fine.
Okay.
No, I get it. So this is, you know, again, I'm saying there's a branch of behavior which can be described by people doing things they want to do. And whatever they want to do, I'm going to do once.
Because in behavioral economics, we also have people cannot do the things they want to do. when it comes to drugs, smoking, alcohol, they know that it's bad, but they cannot control themselves, right?
And the question is like, is it like a proper way to bake all that into the reward function? If
you have a better suggestion, I'm open to it. I think this is the only way I have to not write philosophy papers. Obviously, you know, like, wow. We want to write a philosophy paper, and I'm fine. You should do that. I don't want to do that. So if this is my way of drawing a line between what I think is actionable and doable and pragmatic, as opposed to open-ended philosophy doing la 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 la. I'm not against it, but like we can just prompt GPT-4 to do that for us. Right? If you want to have like an infinite number of philosophy papers, just prompt the system. Wait for GPT-5. Maybe it's going to write all the papers for you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah?
Okay, this is for you, Joshua. Hello.
Okay. So what we have so far is these things are the final rewards. You may want to write a philosophy paper about how this is crazy. Fine. Maybe write 1,000 of them. Also fine. Now let's talk about one question is like, how do you actually evaluate progress and compare learning algorithms, right? Because if I have the setting and I want to make progress as a machine learning researcher, there's like called the researcher's dilemma. What actually is a good algorithm? How do you know if my algorithm is better than yours? Any suggestions? Of what?
Of different rollouts, different scenarios.
Of whom with whom? Let's be specific.
You do self-play, you just
self-play. Self-play. So we use ours. We could, for example, be looking at how well I do when paired with myself. Can anyone tell me why that's a terrible idea? It's a great suggestion and terrible idea. Why? There's a very good test case for this, but I'll open the floor to all of you.
Not going to work with any other agent that's been failure dependent.
Fantastic. It's not going to work with any other agent. So let's think of like failure modes. What is a great algorithm under self-play? Fantastic algorithm.
Okay.
No,
What were you talking about?
in the iterated prisoners dilemma. What's a fantastic algorithm under self-play? Maximize team rewards. It's a really good algorithm, right? And what does that do? It cooperates in the single shot prisoners dilemma. And what did we say was crazy? To cooperate in the single shot prisoners dilemma. So the algorithm is out. Does that make sense? So we know that self-play is not the answer. Right? We know this. What else could we do? A random policy? The answer is actually really, really hard, right? And this is a bit of a sort of detour now just to think about where do we even know what we want to do, let alone what we should do, but how do we evaluate, right? And I've created this table here, and I basically break out 2 different settings on the columns and 3 different things on the rows. And that is, do I control all the agents in the environment at test time? Or do I control one of many agents and other agents exist? That's the first breakout in the columns. Okay, at test time. So let's make this clear. If I'm a principal and all the robots robbing the bank are controlled by me, and they get interviewed one against each other, I'm in the team control setting because I control all the agents as a single principal. If instead I control one of the agents and some other principal controls the other agents, then I'm in a single agent control setting. Is that clear? Awesome, thank you. And then here we have different reward structures, which is 2-player 0-sum. So you just said self-play. Self-play is an awesome idea with a caveat in 2-player 0-sum when you set AlphaGo, because real-world competitive settings, Nash is all you need. Okay, you literally just have to find the Nash equilibrium. Why is that? Because if I can't be beaten by the worst-case opponent in a 2-player 0-sum game, that means I can't be beaten by any opponent in a 2-player 0-sum game, because even the worst-case opponent can't beat me. So Nash is all you need, right? Now, what about fully cooperative settings, which also sounds easy? Everyone's working together. What do you evaluate with? Well, it turns out only the robot swarm, where I'm a single principal controlling a swarm of robots at test time, is easy to evaluate. Because suddenly, when I only control one agent, I have to ask what other agents are in the environment, and that changes the entire evaluation protocol. Does that make sense? And suddenly you have a big question mark, what are we even trying to do? Because it matters what the other agents are in the environment, right? And everything matters suddenly. Are you working with humans? If so, with what humans at test time? Who are you playing with? And I've done a lot of work. It's called zero-shot coordination, it's called ad hoc team play, tons of work. And it's really hard to even get right what the evaluation protocol should be for all of this. And now we get into the worst of the both, which is if we're a general sum game and we have real world AI settings where you want to control one agent out of many. Right. So this is basically that describes most applications of real world AI systems, because you're acting in the world, there's other acting agents, and it's super unclear how you evaluate what benchmarks you should be using. Does that make sense? And there's a few things we could be doing. So Xavi said, let's just like maximize, let's do self-play. Then the right answer is maximize social welfare. And this is really easy to specify. So let's think about like what might be some goals for us as researchers. It's easy to specify to measure because I can simulate it and I can just maximize the total reward in the team. The counter argument is obvious. Principals will never deploy the algorithms, right? You can develop algorithms that are really good at maximizing total welfare. So some of years in prisons across all players, because they would do things like unconditional cooperation in the IPD, and they would play like cooperation in the single shot prisoners dilemma. They're just crazy algorithms, so nobody would deploy these agents. The other thing I could be doing is like say I'm going to define a pool of agents, a random policy, a defective policy, a cooperating policy, and say I'm going to evaluate as best response. Best response being like training my agent to maximize the return when matched with these other agents. And the counter argument is the ranking will depend entirely on the pool. If you change the pool, you get different ranking. Where does the pool come from? Does that make sense? So instead, I am suggesting this following. That's my definition of what a good cooperative AI algorithm is. Yeah, cooperative AI, by the way, really good buzzword. Keep that in mind. It's awesome. Which is an algorithm that a self-interested principal is incentivized to deploy across a broad range of settings and co-players. And as more principals deploy it, the overall welfare increases. That is what I call a good cooperative AI algorithm. Okay. Why is this? Because A, if I come to you with this algorithm, I'm going to be like, hey, do you want to use this thing to represent your courtroom? You're going to be like, what does it do? And I was like, this is what it does. You're like, oh, this sounds awesome. I'm going to use it. Because you're going to do better if you use it. But crucially, it doesn't present itself another prisoner's dilemma. Because it turns out if Meow also uses it, both of you are going to do better, rather than this being like the defection action in the IPD. Does that make sense? With the first thing I'm saying, you actually want to do this. With the second statement, I'm saying this is not like defecting in the IPD itself. Because your choice of learning algorithm could itself be another social dilemma that the principals now face. Does that make sense? I see some nodding, some confusion. Questions?
I think it actually like channels back to my previous question, like what happens if the algorithm is like not specifically, optimizing your outcome.
You wouldn't use it.
But the welfare.
You wouldn't use it by definition. We just had this like, should they say it again? If you come to me and say, here's an algorithm that you can use to represent yourself in courtroom, and they say, what does it do? Well, it will send you to prison for 10 years when you could be in prison for 1 year. And I say, hell no. We say, I'm not going to use it. Thank you. Go back to the drawing board.
But in advance, before choosing it, you don't necessarily know if that's true. You just see that.
I'm a principal, so I have agency. I know how the algorithm operates. Otherwise, I don't have principle. I'm not a principal. So Sabi's answer is, why don't we have things that lie to the user, to the principal? Let's just lie. Let's like mislead them. We just have AI systems that say they do X and then do Y. Yes, of course.
I'm just thinking that if you are a new prospective user of this algorithm, we'll look at the grand average and not like.
No, I will not use that grand. I wouldn't use. I would ask, what does it do for me? What does the algorithm do? I would ask, what is this algorithm optimized to do? How does it work? How does it do in these test cases?
Okay.
That's what I would do. I don't know what you would do. Maybe you're just like, whatever, optimize, send me to prison for 100 years, it's fine. And maximize total return if everyone does it. Yeah. But then you are defying the definition of rewards. We go back to like 15 slides ago, we said these rewards are final. We can keep going back to the same point. It's your time. I don't mind. I know what's happening here, right? So if you want to keep discussing the same point over and over again in an infinite loop, totally fine with me. I'm going to be out in 25 minutes, so you make most of it. Any more questions? No? The framework we're using for this is, can I see a show of hand? Who knows what reinforcement learning is? Awesome. So you don't?
Well, I heard about it. I know about
It doesn't matter too much. It's basically just saying we have a system that can maximize rewards. Right? There's an agent that gets observations, rewards, and takes actions and maximizes the long-term expected return. The sum of rewards in the episode by interacting with the environment. And we're going to use deep neural networks in principle, so we can deploy this in complex settings. Function approximators, things like decision trees, but with soft weights. Also multi-agent learning, because we have a bunch of agents that have their own observations, rewards, and actions. Yeah, they coexist in the world, multi-agent. Yeah, and what happens in the world depends on the joint actions of all the agents. Okay. And the paper we're going to talk about is published in 2022. So this was after FLAIR started in October 2021. So we had our first batch of ICML papers here from Oxford. And the slides are mostly due to Chris Lewis, a fantastic PhD student of mine at FLAIR. So we just talked about the IPD, the iterated matrix game. And what we had is we have policies pi that look at the previous outcomes, the state, and take actions A. And there's my policy and there's the other policy, and we can evaluate these. These could be all defect, for that, and we can evaluate what happens, right? In this IPD. What we can also do is we can parameterize the policies. So here I've said the policy of the other players is doing something. We don't know what it is, but it's doing something fixed. And here I have parameters, theta, that describe the mapping from states to actions. So far, nothing has happened. And now I can think about updating my parameters as I keep playing many games. I play the IPD. For example, we play the IPD, we observe the outcomes, and we play the IPD again. Now, what I might want to do is I might want to use reinforcement learning to update my parameters. We play a trajectory of games. I look at the outcomes against your policy, and then I use reinforcement learning to update my policy theta. Can anyone tell me what would happen if I did this for a large number of games, capital T? what would this converge to, this process, as outlined on this slide? And by the way, online, you've been very, very quiet. This is fine, but you're invited if you also want to get involved in the discussion. Is anyone still alive online?
Yeah, people are still around.
I doubt.
Make any signs of being alive.
If you're alive. Yeah, see, it's dropping out. They're like, no, this is...
Well, that's also a sign.
Cool. Cool. Does anyone have any questions online? As you've seen, there's no bad questions in this. Any questions? Okay, I assume your sound is on. If you want to speak up, just speak up online, please. Otherwise, I'll just keep going through the slides. It's saying we have policies, pi, which explain the mapping from observations to actions, which are the mapping from observation to actions. Now we parameterize the policy by weights theta. Theta are the weights of the policy. Think of a model that says input output. And now based on what happens in the actual interactions in the environment, when we're playing this game, we update our weights theta. Okay, using reinforcement learning. It's an algorithm to maximize returns. So what does theta converge to when I do this for a large number of interactions? Guesses. There's no bad guesses. What happens? Where does this go? Anyone? Anyone online? Where does theta go as I apply reinforcement to update one player, pi I, keep the other player pi minus I fixed in the IPD?
Do you mean theta as a number or as a strategy? Or?
Theta are weights, a set of numbers that specifies the strategy. It's a differential mapping from inputs to probabilities of actions given the state. Weights of the agent. They specify a strategy. What happens? You have a fixed player pi minus I. I'm doing reinforcement learning to maximize my rewards iteratively. What does this convert to if everything goes well?
That's strategy, yeah.
Alex, so many points. Thank you. Let's go to best response. It's going to converge to best response. Was that hard? Are you an intimidator or something? Xavi, what's going on? Tell me.
Yeah, I'm just waiting. I already took up too much time.
You didn't. You did ask great questions.
No?
No, please. There's no bad questions, right? It's the best response. Okay. Online, does that make sense? Okay. Moving on. Please shout if it doesn't make sense. Because if this doesn't make sense, the rest of the page would also not make sense, right? So what I can also do is I can use RL for both players to update their returns, to update their policy to maximize returns. Okay, and this is what's called self-play. So what can have any kind of value?
Yeah, I mean, the sum of all of these will equal to 1 or?
The return is just the sum of rewards, discount sum of rewards. So you get, 1 year in prison, 3 year in prison every time step. You add that up, you can discount by gamma. Right. So it's like, imagine you have some annuity where you have a bond, it pays an amount every year, and you look at the current value of the bond. That's like discounting and reinforcement learning. Okay. Now we can do reinforcement learning, both of us, and we can ask what happens when we do so. Right. This is exactly what Xavi said, which is we're going to have two agents learning together in the environment. We have theta I and theta minus I is all the other agents. Okay. And the question is, what happens when we do so? Right? This is kind of interesting. And that's called naive learning. Naive learning just says every player updates their policy by maximizing their value functions. I'm not calling it VI, right? And I'm using gradient descent terminology here, which just says I'm going to take a gradient step towards increasing my expected return. Seems super useful, right? I mean, it's a very rational thing to do here. I have current policy and I'm estimating how can I change my policy to increase my return. And every player does this independently. Okay. It's like the most benign, well-motivated algorithm ever. What do you think happens when you do this in the IPD? Actually, let's first think about what happens when we do this in the single shot business dilemma. What would you expect to happen? Let's sharpen our intentions. If I do this independent learning in the single shot business dilemma, what happens? What do you expect to happen? If I just maximize my own reward. If both of us maximize our own reward, yeah?
They both do.
Correct. They would both defect, right? That's obvious because I want to maximize reward. I want to minimize years in prison. How do I do this? It doesn't matter what you play. I'm going to just defect independent, like always. There's an even state. The surprising thing is when I do this in the iterated prisoner's dilemma, they also simply defect unconditionally. Okay. So this is shown here where you have the probability of cooperation on the x-axis for me and the probability of cooperation on the y-axis for you, the other player, in all of the 5 states that we could be in, given this game. The initial state as naught, and 4 other states depending on the last actions of me and of you. Okay. And we played this out over 30 seeds. So we have reproducibility of the results. And that's a little bit terrifying because it basically means if I, instead of going to the courtroom myself as a principal, I use AI agents using state-of-the-art deep multi-agent reinforcement technology, these agents will not be able to get to this cooperative solution where we reciprocate with each other after a few turns, spending 1 year in prison. Instead, they will be blindly defecting, which means everyone spends 2 years in prison. Does that make sense? It's rather sad. Okay. And the key question then is, how do we get around this problem? And what we did a long time ago at OpenAI doing an internship is that we introduced what's called LOLA, learning with opponent learning awareness. And this is basically an algorithm that says, I'm not just going to update my own parameters to maximize my own return, but I'm accounting for the fact that you are also a learning agent, which naive learning doesn't, because I ignore the fact that the world contains other agents, and I just try and maximize my own return by controlling my own parameters. And LOLA instead says, well, yes, we do have your parameters theta minus I, but I also know that you're a learning agent. And your learning step actually depends on my policy. Because depending how I act in the environment, that will go into your training algorithm, and that will change how you learn. So when I now optimize my value, I should not just differentiate with respect to my own weights, theta I, but also differentiate through your learning step, FRL, the reinforcement learning step that you have, and differentiate my value function with respect to your parameters. It's called the chain rule. Right. Take df, dx, dx, dy, right? Yes.
I'm just going to break my wall of silence. So I'm just curious if in this situation, do you need to have access to the other person's?
Great question. Great question. That's a fantastic question, Sabi. Thank you. The question is, do I need to have access to the other agent's parameters? Yeah, of course. I've written it down here, right? It's like totally crazy what I'm doing here.
Not just the parameters, but the actual policy, the update policy.
Yeah, of course. You need to know that it's a reinforcement learning agent. You need to know their weights, yada, yada. Because otherwise, how am I going to estimate this, right? So the way it's written down here, I need to have access to your parameters of your policy and your reward and. Right? So when is this meaningful? It's where we can do training and simulation deployment in the real world. Because in simulation, I have access. It's to generate policies that can do this type of behavior on a simulator, and then we deploy them in the real world, and they do this type of reciprocation then in the real world at test time. And what happens when we actually deploy 2 LOLA agents in self-play on a simulator and train them together, we get this policy instead. Now, I hate to be interactive again, because I think everyone's at this point sort of, please just go through the slides. It's 5:45 on a Thursday afternoon, and we want some cake and pizza. but can anyone tell me what this policy is? What is this policy?
If I understand correctly, then depending on what was the first iteration.
Was the previous actions of me and the other agent. So this is C means I cooperated, you cooperated. CD means I cooperated, you defected. These are the colors. Then you see the probability of cooperation of me on the x-axis, probability of cooperation of you on the y-axis. What's that? This is as note as the initial state. Nothing has happened yet. We're just starting the episode.
I would suggest, I think that they just learn to copy each other's.
Yes, absolutely. So this policy that these agents learn by just doing learning from scratch in simulation is called tit for tat, right? Tit for tat is very famous in game theory because it won the Axelrod IPD tournament in 1980s, where researchers were invited to submit programs that could play the iterated business dilemma. They submitted hundreds of thousands of lines of code, I think, on that order. People put a lot of effort into this. And frustratingly to many of them, the program that won was 5 lines of code. And it was basically on the first if I cooperate, after that I copy your move. Go tit for tat. Okay, so it's famous in the community. And here we can convince ourselves that this in many cases does play tit for tat. If we both defected, we defect again. If I defected, you cooperated. I now cooperate, you now defect. 1-0. And in the beginning we both cooperate. Yes?
It's like one slight detail that in that challenge. The result was averaged over several runs against different policies, and tit for tat was never performing like really well against like any specific policies, but the average score of the tit for tat was the highest as far as I recall.
Yeah, it was a round robin tournament, which means everyone is evaluated against everyone else. You take the average performance. Right? It's like if you have the entire population of all possible strategies that people submitted, how do you do on average in that entire pool? Which I think is a very fair evaluation of quality of a policy.
The round of action is very.
Yep. So in the first round, we're both cooperating, and after that, we copy each other. Okay. It's a little bit like what we converge to, but we were more forgiving. Tit for tat is very, very brutal because what happens if somebody, if 2 tit for tat players meet and they're noisy, if we have a defect, there will be like mutual defection going on. Does that make sense? It's very difficult to get out of mutual defection cycles. Okay. So I'm not claiming that tit for tat is great. I'm just claiming it's much, much better than unconditional defection in the IPD. Right? We've just moved from we're guaranteed to spend 2 years in prison on average if we all use these policies to actually we can reciprocate. If others play nice, we can play nice, and if not, we're going to punish them for being mean. Which is a deeply human notion, right? Which is what like humans end up doing without agreement in these settings. More questions? Okay. And it's quite bad because it's great, but it's also bad, right? Because it's myopic. We only shape one learning step. It's inconsistent because we're assuming the other agent is a naive learner, because this gradient step here is actually coming from a naive learner, not a LOLA agent. So I'm actually modeling you as a naive learner. And we need this high order gradients because of the chain rule. I'm differentiating through your learning step. And number 4, I need to know access to your policy, which is quite unreasonable in many cases. We addressed all of this in a paper called Model Free Opponent Shaping, M-FOS, done by Chris Liu, my PhD student. Where we said, rather than having this update function being reinforcement learning, why don't we just parameterize it by some weights phi? So we have a policy parameterized by theta, and now we have an update step from policy to policy parameterized by phi. Now what we could do is, we can now make this phi itself a dynamic variable. What we can now also do is, for example, like one thing could be, we could use reinforcement learning to update the phi. So we went from iterated game to now the learning loop using reinforcement learning. And now we're saying, let's just meta learn it. Let's effectively just learn what that update function should be rather than reinforcement learning. And we can learn that update function using reinforcement learning. And if we do this properly, we can now train the update function. So if you're a reinforcement learner, you go and play the game. I can learn an update function that maximizes my long-term expected return when being matched with you in a learning environment. Okay. And this is how we do. So this is now the M-FOS agent, and we're matching it against naive learner, against the LOLA agent, and MAML, another meta-learning method from literature. And what you can find is something quite bizarre, because the M-FOS agent only spends half a year in prison, while the naive learner spends 2.14 years in prison. Now, clearly, you should never spend more than 2 years in prison. Because if you're ever spending more than 2 years in prison, that means you could just like blindly defect, right? You just throw up everything and say, I'm going to play defective no matter what, because I can at least guarantee 2 years in prison, right? And also, we're doing collectively quite bad, because we can actually spend collectively 2.6 years in prison rather than 2 years when we're both cooperating. Does that make sense? So this opponent shaping method, by learning how to actually update my policy so I can guide your learning process in the long term in my own interest, is extraordinarily powerful. And it's a big warning, because it's actually so that if you have a better method that is more powerful, you can obtain worse results collectively, right? Which violates, remember, you're incentivized to use it, but it violates the second paradigm so far, because so far other players are worse off, right? It's unclear that we're collectively better off. And it actually discovered what's called zero-determinant extortion, which is only known by humans since 2010s, something like that. And what it does is it sets up these learning fields so that it first rewards the opponent for cooperating more. So this is the reward of the opponent, this is the reward of my player, and these are a bunch of different policies in the current policy. You can see it's first correlated. So if they want to maximize their return, they have to increase my return. And as the opponent becomes more cooperative, this learning field becomes steeper, and then it switches. So I basically first shape the other agent into cooperation by aligning incentives, and then I switch around, extort them. They unlearn to cooperate, and then I switch around again. So it continuously bullies the other player into cooperation. Okay, it's quite an awful algorithm, actually, if you think about it. But I wouldn't be here if there wasn't good news on the horizon, or a direct solution. And that is, what if we didn't just have one meme on the left-hand side, but we expand the meme on the other side? And that is meta self-play, right? What happens if instead of going to Xabi and say, hey, Xabi, I know how you like to maximize your rewards. Here's my M-FOS algorithm. Don't you want to use this? Xabi then goes on and says, hey, Alex, and then suddenly what happens is Xabi is using this. All of you spend all this time in prison, but then you realize, why is it Xabi running around outside? There must be something going on. And you call me up and say, hey, Jakob, your M-FOS algorithm, I'd like to use that too, right? Because you spend all this time in prison, you realize something is going wrong, because he robs all the banks and never gets like time in prison, half a year in prison ever, right? Does that make sense? Here, this is Xabi, this is all of you, and this is like, whoa, this is like terrible. And then what you do is you actually also deploy M-FOS. So we call meta self-play. So we're training two meta agents to actually shape each other. There's some details, but if you do so, then we'll end up with 1 year in prison at the end of the day. Does that make sense? So basically, once we all switch to M-FOS, those who don't switch to M-FOS, I'm sorry or not sorry, you're going to end up like spending a lot of time in prison, but it's your fault for doing naive learning, which is also super irresponsible, let's be clear, right? Because the people who get penalized the most are the naive learners. But remember, naive learning is a terrible algorithm, so you should be running this in the first place. So in some sense, it's incentive compatible, because you shouldn't be running naive learning in the multi-agent world, which I know some, because you're effectively willing to do unconditional defection in this environment. And now everyone can happily converge to M-FOS, 1 year in prison each. Does that make sense? And then you can see what this looks like in a meta self-play. We get something that is defect here. It has the DC, it has the CD. It has many of the same points. Oh yeah, so this is interesting. Yeah, so it's again a tit-for-tat like strategy. And you can also run this iterated matching pennies, which is a 2 players 0 sum game, what we talked about earlier. We could also deploy AlphaFold, AlphaGo, and even there shapes the other agents into being exploitable. We've done a lot of work ever since to scale this up. It's all open source. The code is there. I won't go into details. And I just want to shout out quickly that this is all powered by what's called JAX, which is a way of doing a lot of environments at once on the GPU. It's been the biggest breakthrough in reinforcement learning, I think, in the last 10 years. It's completely changed what we can do with our algorithms on academic compute, assuming that we managed to beg NVIDIA to give us some GPUs. Thank you, dear Lord NVIDIA. I follow thee dearly. Okay. No, it is important. In every presentation, I have to praise the overlords of NVIDIA to rain GPUs down on us. If not, I'll be forever in the purgatory of the GPU-starved academics. Okay, I think this is, yes, so I think this is a summary slide now. So we've really pushed opponent shaping this idea of taking account of other agents learning to the limit. There were a lot of shortcomings. We've addressed them, but with great power comes great irresponsibility, which is we had an algorithm that can actually extort other learners and be worse collectively. But luckily, we can now do meta self-play if we all deploy the same algorithm. And we're incentivized to do so, then collectively we do better. And I think that makes it for a good cooperative AI algorithm compared to others. But as I said, this is a hard and open problem. And I would like to thank you all for your kind and inquisitive and curious questions and open the floor for any other contributions at this point. Thank you very much.
Data on, so you made this advance, which is clearly quite, impressive and wonderful. I'm just wondering, how long does it take? Like, I'm assuming a situation where perhaps there are people who are out there developing that are several steps behind where you're at currently. How long does it take those people to catch up? And is there any data on if there's a lag, for instance, if they're 3 steps behind, right? And they use that technology for years. How long does it take for them to catch up and have the better welfare oriented?
Yeah, to be clear, I mean, I think right now the world is basically in the naive learner, right? Unconditional defection. And we're in quite a bad state. So the good news is you can't do much worse in many settings. Naive learning is awful. So like we're in the worst case collectively in a sense, if we are deploying these algorithms. So the only thing we can do is we can try and push these things to practical applicability as soon as possible, so I can get us out of the defect-defect equilibrium that we're sliding into, right? One more thing to keep in mind, I've currently presented cooperation as good and defection as bad. Can anyone tell me why this is highly problematic? Are there settings in which defection is good? I can tell you one where it's not good. Global security, right? Nuclear bombs are typical prisoner's dilemma, and you certainly do not want to defect in that game. Luckily, it's iterated, mutually assured, right? I can see what you did and I can react and respond, right? Are there any settings where defection is the desired outcome and actually cooperation is illegal? It's called collusion, markets. Price finding mechanisms, competition. Setting prices in the market mirrors a prisoner's dilemma with more fine-grained action spaces. And in those cases, if you were to cooperate with each other, you would maximize your profit. As the iterated games, in principle, it is possible. And here we have the opposite problem. We have algorithms that can be proven to not to collude implicitly. So there are settings where we should actually, the regulator needs to make it illegal to deploy something like M-FOS or LOLA, because those could naturally shape other players into cooperation, which means maintaining higher prices, which damages consumers. Efficient markets rely on defection amongst market participants. So if 2 suppliers collude to set a high price, they're cooperating with each other, they're maximizing their own profit, being very rational, but also highly illegal, and then they go to prison, they can play the prisoner's dilemma. Okay, that makes us have to be quite nuanced. We're sort of like always saying cooperation is good, defection is bad, because it sounds like it, but it's utterly not true. There are just a lot of settings where it is true, because when we make the collective welfare the total welfare of the group, then we probably want to keep that higher rather than lower. Any more questions?
Are there any online questions? If not, then I actually would have some questions, but it's more in just like the generalization side. So don't you think that following the same way of logic that you just like draw an external circle and another level of meme, somebody could just put another layer of meta learning on your meta learner? Mm-hmm. Like how meta can meta get?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I mean, we sort of, does it converge? If you go meta to infinity, right? Beyond running out of space on this plot, if you keep adding more loops, where do you get to? And could you shape my M-FOS agent? The trouble you run into is a little bit around what are the assumptions here in terms of where training happens, because obviously I can only do this training if I train in simulation, right? And then the question is really, the compute requirements go for a theory paper on this. Actually, they're extraordinarily unfortunate. They're sort of double exponentials or something like that, right? Yeah. So you you will be compute limited. So unless we have much better methods, you just can't run anything on the meta level, right? And at that point, it goes more into trying to shape the way that I set up my meta learning problem. That's what it would mean practically speaking, right? You would have to, at some point, we have to go into a place we can deploy these credibly in the real world. And that means you have to think about how I'm collecting my data. You have to shape my shaper, basically. Does that make sense? Shape my shaping, my meta learning algorithms.
This still relies on like a very strong assumption, I think, that you can model exactly other people's policies.
You don't have to model it exactly, because remember here, I'm assuming other agents are learning in the real on data collected in the real environment. Well, I'm running a model of the entire system, and they can run a broad diversity of different learning algorithms, different objectives, different things, and I can then at test time, which is their training time, attune to it. So in principle, we should be able to be quite agnostic and quite robust. For example, M-FOS doesn't actually get access to the policy of the other agent. Right? We've done work now where it's treated as a POM DP, where I don't actually see the other agent's policy, I just see what happens in the world.
Yes, and I'm just thinking the same way you came up with this algorithm. On the other side, somebody can also just develop a new algorithm that you have not thought of. So it's not a closed set problem.
Of course, no. This is interesting. Like, can we ever get guarantees? Can we ever say like this algorithm is unexploitable, for example, and in what circumstances? That's interesting. There's a really good question, like, how do you make these algorithms not just empirically interesting but also robust theoretically, right? Now we know the obvious, the elephant in the room, which is the moment you have function approximation, all bets are off, right? We know there are no guarantees effectively, because neural networks can be brittle. And so there's a funny place where we're deploying these systems anyway. We're doing machine learning for self-driving cars, for mission critical things. And we know these systems don't have guarantees. It's all empiricism, right? It's all like, in practice, it's fine in most cases. And if not, we just got to make sure that like something happens that's not awful.
And like a true engineer.
Yeah, and I want to bring something in here, which is you can think of a lot of this. And I haven't done this properly yet. I think you can think of a lot of these things from an alignment perspective, because you have the principal and agents interface. And you have to think about this nowadays when you interact with LLMs, with like large machine learning systems that you're using as a principal. You are actually the principal. Remember this. In principle, these things should be maximizing your returns, operating on your behalf. Right? I just wanted to put it out there as a thought experiment for all of you. Do you think this is what's happening when you interact with LLMs? Does it seem like these systems are there to try and maximize your objective functions, right? And I think this is a notion, this idea of principal and agent, that we should take very seriously as a community doing machine learning, thinking about these systems, this abstraction, and that what does it mean? Do I actually have agency at the moment as a principal if all the different LLM systems that exist out there in the world actually optimize some other reward function? Let's go back to Xavi's point. Can I just optimize something else? It turns out in the moment you can, because you don't have true agency. But we don't have actual choice. We don't know what these systems are actually doing, and you don't have an informed decision to make to say this thing maximizes my reward function, this one doesn't, and this one pushes a crazy ideological agenda, right? And what we've seen so far is more, well, actually probably everything pushes some crazy agenda, but you can pick your shades of like crazy in this regard. Does that make sense? So I think there's the tight connection in all of this to alignment and what does it actually mean to be aligned, whose incentives matter, and so on and so forth. And I think that's something that I want to think about more and explore more, but I just, I haven't had the time. Just like I haven't had the time to make new slides. We have 1,000 new papers coming out of Flare that are much new and more current. But I think this topic is cool. It's like kind of like a neat topic. Every time I give this talk, I sort of see it from a different point of view. But if you're interested in Flare, we have a website. We have tons of papers online. They're wonderful people. Come talk to us. We organize invited talks. We're very welcoming and friendly. Actually, my students are much nicer than me. I just want to put that out there. You know some of them, right? They're fantastic.
They're great team.
Please.
How do you take if I use my laptop to run very simulation? That's very interesting.
Yeah, so LOLA, I mean, some of these things you can run on a Colab, on a laptop. These things you can run in like.
The very strong, high performance GPUs.
Yes. So this is now we go back to praying to the NVIDIA overlord. I mean, are you here? Are you listening to me, Jensen? Dear Jensen, I obey by the my daily H100 give us today.
AI to do this on your behalf?
Sorry?
Have you considered making an AI to create a video on your behalf?
Yes, of course. I have a large swath of H100s just putting out pro Jensen propaganda on the internet, or tagged with Oxford in them. Flair loves you, Jensen. Did you hear that? Thank you. We do love Jensen. He's awesome. NVIDIA is the best. They're like the best GPUs ever. We should spend all our money on H100 GPUs.
Right. That was a place for ads.
So joking aside, you can run some of these on like the LOLA things you can run quite easily and quickly on Colab online for free. The M-FOS multi-opponent shaping is much more computation demanding. You will need a pretty powerful GPU system to run this. Yeah, so that's just the reality of life, which is interesting because I think also making these more efficient is interesting. More questions?
I was just scratching.
It's okay.
I actually have a quick question.
Please, online to live. This is awesome.
Yeah, so
Ah.
I've had a bit of experience in terms of model work with PSRO and the empirical game theoretic analysis side of things. And so I was curious what your thoughts are on the approach that you take for these problems versus that approach.
Cool. Why don't we just echo this back? What do you think PSO is going to do in the IPD?
I think PSRO does well at finding Nash equilibrium. So
let's go with that. What do you think it's going to do in the IPD?
Straight defect-defect.
Awesome. I think you just answered your question. This is awesome, right?
Yes, but I think there are work in terms of alternating the exploration strategies to cooperative.
Yeah, so you can be cooperative, which can be awful, right? So again, I think that you have a choice. If you want to be fully cooperative, it's easy, and you have team control. You're going to maximize team reward. So you have a choice. You're either going to cooperate in a single shot dilemma, which is, according to some definition, insane, or you're going to play defect-defect in the IPD. If you find something that doesn't do that in self-play, please give me a call. That'd be fantastic.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
I mean, this is a really important point because we're forgetting that it's not a coincidence that all the work that gets published, PSO, like Alpha Zero, thousands of papers published. Where do they sit? 2-player zero sum. Right? Almost none of the work 2-player zero sum. Right? It just isn't the case. Like we have no 2 players. People have the same or an opposite reward function. It doesn't happen. It's completely irrelevant. Right? But it happens to be the only setting where we can meaningfully and easily say this is better than that. Because exploitability is easy. Nash is easy. Nash is all you need. Right? And I think this highlights just how obscene, crazy, whatever it is, our community is in multi-agent learning. Because I've done tons of papers on fully cooperative team control, which also is almost like a set of 0 problems in the world. But why do we do this? Because it's easy to say mine's better than yours. Yeah. Thank you. That was a really good question. Thank you. Any other questions online?
Okay, if there are no more questions, then thank you again for.
Awesome. Thank you all for participating.
It was really awesome. And now, well, the zero pizza is stuck. Hopefully it's still hot. Okay, thank you everyone for joining online.